Imagine a tense atmosphere. The air is electric. A heated argument is in full swing. Hearts beat faster. Every word feels like a shot, and every phrase is like a battle line. In this verbal duel, both opponents are focused on only one thing, proving their own rightness. But suddenly, like a voice of reason, a warning sounds. You've already lost. How is this possible? After all, there is an active struggle for one's beliefs, for defending one's position. But, according to the insightful observer, entering into such a conflict is already a capitulation. True strength, he argues, lies not in striving at all costs to emerge victorious from an argument, but in something much deeper and more unexpected. What is this hidden power? Why is silence sometimes more eloquent than any words? Let's try to get to the heart of this philosophy and reveal the secret of quiet power, which bestows true might. In common understanding, strength is associated with victories in debates, with the ability to convince others of one's rightness and dominate the conversation. However, the thinker Friedrich N. held a completely different point of view. He believed that true strength lies not in a stream of words, but in the ability to control one's emotions and reactions. Reasons for human disagreements. A deep analysis of the nature of the dispute. Anyone who has ever been at the epicenter of a heated discussion knows that feeling when passions run high. But how many have thought about the root causes that push people into verbal battles? According to N., the root of most disputes lies not in the pursuit of truth, but in satisfying deep psychological needs. One of these needs is the protection of one's own self. People enter into an argument when they feel that their identity is under threat. Acknowledging one's wrongness is perceived as a painful loss of a part of oneself, and the mind desperately resists this, resorting to any arguments. Often, a struggle for power is hidden behind a verbal skirmish. In such debates, facts and logic take a back seat, giving way to the desire for domination. It is not so important to prove one's rightness as it is to insist on one's own, control the course of the discussion, and force the opponent to retreat. The desire for social approval can also be the cause of disputes. Some people defend a certain point of view not because they sincerely believe in it, but because they want to impress others, to seem smart, self-confident, and strong. N considered such behavior as a manifestation of weakness. He believed that people who allow emotions to overwhelm them in a dispute lose control of the situation. At the moment when a person succumbs to provocation and loses their temper, he, according to N, has already suffered defeat. N's widely known concept of the will to power is often misinterpreted, as many mistakenly believe that it is about the primitive use of force. However, in reality, this idea implies a person's ability to assert their will in the face of reality, which does not always require verbal expression. Sometimes, true strength is manifested in the ability to refrain from immediate reaction. In this regard, the image of the Superman arises, an ideal individual, surpassing ordinary people, who occupies a central place in N's philosophy. The Superman differs from the ordinary person in that he does not succumb to the power of emotions and does not enter into disputes for the sake of simple victory or proof of his rightness. Instead, he carefully chooses the moments to enter into a discussion and the moments to remain silent, realizing that true strength lies not in verbosity, but in the ability to control the course of the entire interaction. Imagine a situation at a meeting where two participants are involved in an argument. One of them behaves loudly and aggressively, striving at all costs to prove his rightness. The other, on the contrary, remains calm and collected, preferring to listen carefully rather than speak. He avoids emotional skirmishes and does not succumb to provocations. And then, when he finally decides to speak, his words sound weighty, timely, and have a decisive influence on the further development of the discussion. The question arises, which of them actually possesses power? N would argue that a person who is able to maintain control over the situation and not succumb to the power of emotions always wins in the long run. What is the secret of strategic silence, which surpasses even triumph in verbal battles and strength? Contrary to popular belief, deliberate silence is not a sign of powerlessness, but a powerful psychological tool that can turn the tide of any confrontation. Skillful use of silence forces the opponent to reveal more and more information about himself, as if drawing out his most secret thoughts and intentions. Silence creates shaky ground of uncertainty in the opponent's mind, forcing him to doubt the correctness of his own words and judgments. The resulting tension creates an atmosphere of discomfort, allowing a skilled strategist to seize control of the situation. A true master does not engage in pointless disputes, but uses silence as a tactical maneuver, a waiting pause, a moment of restraint, a timely response capable of turning the conversation in their favor. This is the essence of power, not in open combat, but in skillfully mastering the battlefield before the battle even begins. Silence is not merely the absence of words, it is a universal tool, a weapon wielded throughout human history by the greatest minds to achieve dominance in intellectual discussions, business negotiations, and even on the battlefields. The concept of power lies not in loud pronouncements or debate victories, but in the ability to exert influence, control the situation, and demonstrate strategic restraint. As a vivid illustration of this principle, consider three legendary figures: Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. Socratic method, the triumph of reason without direct confrontation. Socrates, the great thinker, avoided ordinary arguments and confrontations. He did not raise his voice, resort to attacks, or seek to impose his views by force. Instead, he masterfully employed a unique technique that continues to profoundly influence intellectual discourse to this day, the Socratic method. This method is the art of asking questions in such a way that the interlocutor independently comes to realize the internal contradictions in their beliefs. Consider this example. An arrogant Athenian politician publicly proclaims his unsurpassed wisdom. Instead of engaging in open polemics, Socrates tactfully asks, "What then is wisdom?" Seeking to confirm his intellectual prestige, the politician begins to offer a definition. However, with each subsequent question from Socrates, this definition becomes increasingly shaky and unconvincing. Ultimately, the politician's self-assurance gives way to confusion as he realizes that he does not, in fact, possess a deep understanding of the concept he so boastfully flaunted. Socrates did not find it necessary to directly point out people's misconceptions. He skillfully guided them to an independent realization of the truth. He deeply understood an important principle. People tend to reject information imposed upon them, but readily accept what they have arrived at independently, as a result of their own reflections and discoveries. This is the essence of quiet power. Instead of wasting energy on fruitless arguments, one should ask questions that cause people to doubt the infallibility of their own beliefs and knowledge. The management strategy employed by Steve Jobs can be characterized as a mastery of directed idea collision. Unlike Socrates, who led through the art of questioning, Jobs exerted influence by skillfully convincing others of his correctness. He did not shy away from disagreements. On the contrary, he created conditions for their emergence. His role as a leader at Apple was not to delve into every detail, but to see the overall perspective and guide the team toward it. Jobs adhered to a simple but effective rule: do not waste energy on pointless disputes. However, when an issue truly mattered, he invested all his resources into it. A prime example is his struggle with his own team of developers over the design of the iPhone. The engineers favored physical buttons, while Jobs insisted on a completely touchscreen interface. Instead of getting bogged down in endless debates, he managed to convince them of his concept. He allowed them to voice their arguments and doubts until, under his guidance, they came to the realization that touchscreen control was not only feasible, but the only correct solution. He did not impose his point of view, but led people to believe it was their own idea. Often, people engage in arguments out of egoistic motives, seeking to prove their correctness. Jobs, on the other hand, used arguments as a tool to achieve a goal, to win support and convince people of his correctness, not simply to assert his opinion. This is the key point. If words do not prompt people to action, they become empty sounds. Miyamoto Musashi, shrouded in an aura of silence, overcame his opponents even before the duel began. Let us digress from philosophical and business aspects and move to the battlefield. The invincible warrior Miyamoto Musashi understood an undeniable truth. The sure path to victory lies through refusing to draw the blade. Musashi has over 60 triumphant duels behind him, but his superiority was not limited to physical preparation alone. His most significant achievements were rooted in the realm of psychology. He skillfully played an intellectual game, throwing his enemies into a state of destabilization even before the battle began. A striking example is his duel with Sasaki Kojiro. Kojiro, a renowned swordmaster, was famous for his lightning speed. However, Musashi did not engage him in open confrontation. Instead, he deliberately arrived at the duel several hours late, driving Kojiro to a frenzy. By the time they clashed, Kojiro was so blinded by rage that he made mistakes, allowing Musashi to achieve an easy victory. Musashi understood that an emotionally unstable opponent was already in a vulnerable position. This philosophy resonates with the concept of the Übermensch, who does not succumb to impulsive reactions but skillfully manages the emotional state of those around him. Musashi proved in practice that silence, composure, and psychological superiority are often more effective than brute physical force. What unites such different figures as Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi? They all demonstrated an amazing ability not to waste their energy on fruitless arguments, remaining calm, and defining the rules of interaction with others. These outstanding individuals realized that true power lies not in loud statements, but in the ability to exert influence. Therefore, the next time you feel the urge to argue, ask yourself, am I succumbing to the power of emotions, or am I maintaining control of the situation? After all, true power is manifested in the ability to remain silent. But why do we so often get into arguments? What makes us prove our point, fight back, and defend our beliefs, even when the discussion reaches a dead end? Many mistakenly believe that the goal of an argument is to establish the truth. However, in reality, an argument is a struggle for power. The more actively we participate in an argument, the more information we reveal about ourselves, about our complexes and emotional weaknesses. Most importantly, we demonstrate that someone else is able to control our reactions. Friedrich Nietzsche deeply understood this pattern. His concept of the will to power consisted not only in physical superiority, but also in achieving such a level of self-control that allows one to influence others, even when they are not aware of it. And modern psychological research confirms the insightfulness of Nietzsche's ideas. Why do people so often find themselves drawn into fruitless disputes? The fact is that an argument is not a field of logic, but rather an arena of psychological battles. By entering into a polemic, a person is convinced that he is defending his principles and views. However, in most cases, he is driven by deep psychological mechanisms, a kind of trigger rooted in the subconscious. Let's consider the main reasons over this phenomenon. First of all, these are cognitive biases, features of the brain that prevent us from thinking rationally and objectively. The brain strives for victory, not for the search for truth and the acquisition of new knowledge. Among the most common distortions are confirmation bias. We tend to seek out and perceive only information that confirms our existing beliefs, ignoring or rejecting anything that contradicts them. 2. Backfire effect. When our beliefs are questioned or criticized, we not only do not change our point of view, but we also begin to defend it even more fiercely, doubling our efforts to protect it. 3. Dunning-Kruger effect. This effect manifests itself in the fact that the less a person knows about an issue, the more confident he is in his rightness and the infallibility of his opinion. These cognitive biases turn most arguments into a meaningless exercise. Participants do not listen to each other, but only wait for the moment to express their point of view without trying to understand the opponent's arguments. In contrast, the Übermensch avoids falling into this trap. He prefers to first listen carefully to the interlocutor, observe his reactions and manner of behavior, and only after that makes a balanced decision about whether it is worth entering into a discussion at all. Emotional triggers, the roots of personal conflicts. Have you ever wondered why certain disagreements cause us a storm of indignation, while others leave us completely indifferent? The reason lies in the fact that in the heat of an argument, we are faced not with logical arguments, but with challenges to our own identity. When someone's point of view comes into sharp contradiction with our deep-seated beliefs, it is perceived as a direct aggression, as an encroachment on our personality. That is why discussions on sensitive topics, such as politics, religion, or philosophy, so quickly turn into fierce battles. In such situations, people feel that not just their views are being questioned, but they themselves, their essence. History teaches us that the most influential figures avoided emotional arguments. The one who can cause you an emotional reaction gains control over you. The Übermensch, on the other hand, does not succumb to provocations. He maintains composure, observes the situation, analyzes it, and only then decides whether it's worth entering into a debate at all. The underlying need for validation, the real motive behind arguments. In most cases, disputes are driven not by a pursuit of truth, but by simple ego. People don't just want to be right. They need others to acknowledge their rightness. Nietzsche understood perfectly that most people seek approval in the eyes of the crowd. They engage in disputes not to find truth, but to gain recognition. However, the Übermensch, Overman, doesn't need external validation. He creates his own truth based on his own beliefs and values. Think of the most influential people in history. Did they waste their time arguing with critics? Not at all. They were focused on realizing their vision, ignoring distractions, and letting their actions speak louder than any words. Their achievements became the best response to any attacks and doubts. En, like a seer, looked into the future because his concepts of power, management, and silence are remarkably echoed by the discoveries of modern psychology. Let's try to understand this phenomenon. Consider the dynamics of power in the context of social relationships. Social psychologists have concluded that true influence in any group belongs not to the most talkative members, but to those who skillfully orchestrate the course of the conversation. They don't interrupt, avoid unnecessary explanations, and carefully weigh each word, making others listen attentively to their every statement. This is why authoritative leaders rarely raise their voices. There's no need. Their words gain weight thanks to the aura of power created by the skillful use of silence. Equally important is the role of self-control in the art of persuasion. Research in behavioral psychology shows that people who remain calm and composed during discussions are far more persuasive than those who give in to emotions. This is because human nature is wired to perceive calmness as a sign of confidence. En was convinced that true strength comes from self-control. The Übermensch is not a prisoner of his emotions. He doesn't just react to circumstances, but makes conscious decisions, making him untouchable. The real reason En attributed special power to silence was not to shield people from disagreements, but his deep conviction that he who controls his emotions and reactions essentially controls the entire course of the conversation. To better understand this concept, consider a few examples. Imagine a situation. If someone allows themselves to succumb to an insult and reacts immediately, they are already at a disadvantage. Similarly, if a person feels a strong need to defend themselves in response to a challenge, they also suffer defeat. And finally, if someone is drawn into a pointless argument with the sole purpose of proving their point, the result is the same: defeat. However, if instead a person takes a position of observer, remains calm, and responds only when it truly serves their interests, they are initially in a winning situation. En's philosophy is not about maintaining eternal silence, but about knowing how to carefully choose which battles to enter. Before saying something, it's worth asking yourself a few important questions. Am I really saying this because I want to or because I feel I have to? Am I reacting under the influence of emotions, or is my answer thoughtful and controlled? Is this dispute worth my effort and energy, or am I just indulging my ego? After all, true strength, as En understood it, lies not in the words themselves, but in the silence that precedes them, in the pause that makes others listen attentively. It lies in the ability to make informed decisions and speak only when it really matters. It is this quiet reception that gives a person genuine power and control over the situation. The veil of silence can hide immense power, but should it always be used, silence can become a formidable weapon. But the thoughtless use of this instrument is as unwise as reckless speech. If power lay solely in silence, then the outstanding thinkers, philosophers, revolutionaries, and prophets of the past would have remained unknown. But they carried their ideas to the world. For true strength lies not in avoiding clashes, but in knowing when to act and when to restrain. There is a common misconception that N called for avoiding struggle and withdrawing from life's vicissitudes. However, his concept of the will to power implied not passivity, but a desire for excellence, development, and self-improvement. Strength is manifested not only in silence, but also in the ability to control oneself and the situation. Complete avoidance of conflict is not a sign of wisdom, but rather a fear disguised as prudence. To master conflict is not to reject it, but to use it as a tool to achieve goals. The Übermensch of N will not waste energy on empty disputes, but will not shy away from a necessary battle. He understands that conflict can be a catalyst for unlocking potential. Why do most people avoid arguments? The answer is simple. They experience discomfort. However, N realized that it is discomfort that is the source of strength. He saw in struggle something necessary, not something to be avoided at all costs. People with weak minds try to avoid complex tasks, while those with strong spirits, on the contrary, embrace them with enthusiasm, realizing that it is overcoming difficulties that promotes personal growth and improvement. Like a warrior who has never entered a battle, or a blade that has never been tested in combat. A mind that avoids intellectual challenges risks remaining undeveloped and vulnerable. The absence of intellectual collision leads to the fact that ideas remain untested, and beliefs are superficial and unfounded. History knows many examples of outstanding thinkers whose ideas, born in disputes and discussions, had a huge impact on the development of mankind. Galileo Galilei, who dared to challenge the established church dogmas about the universe, was persecuted and condemned. Socrates, who questioned generally accepted beliefs, was sentenced to death. Even the ideas of N, which seemed insane to contemporaries, today form the basis of modern thought. Their greatness lay not in silent agreement, but in a conscious choice of intellectual struggle and participation in necessary discussions. It is important to understand the difference between arguing for the sake of proving one's own rightness and arguing aimed at forming a new reality. N understood this perfectly. Great leaders, philosophers, and visionaries do not avoid disputes, but use them as a powerful tool to achieve their goals. Socrates did not impose his beliefs, but skillfully asked questions, forcing opponents to come to new conclusions on their own. The works of N were designed to provoke, cause doubt, and bring people out of a state of intellectual slumber. Steve Jobs was not afraid of conflicts, but used them to stimulate innovation and force people to go beyond the usual. Influential people participate in disputes not for self-affirmation, but for transformation. They seek not just to win the debate, but to change the world in accordance with their vision. The Übermensch, according to the philosopher, enters into a discussion not to satisfy his ego, but to achieve a specific goal. It is worth entering into a polemic when it contributes to the development of intelligence, reveals hidden aspects of truth, stimulates personal growth, and contributes to changing the balance of power in a favorable direction. However, one should refrain from arguing if it is dictated only by a desire to protect one's own ego. If the interlocutor is not ready to perceive new ideas, if the debate turns into a meaningless emotional confrontation, or when silence itself is a more powerful tool of influence. A dispute devoid of a strategic approach is a manifestation of weakness, while in reasoned and verified discussion is a demonstration of strength. N did not avoid debates, he accepted conflict, but always on his own terms. If a polemic leads to a weakening of positions, it should be avoided. If it contributes to strengthening, then it must be entered into. If a dispute is only a distraction, it should be ignored. A conflict that makes you stronger is not something to be avoided, but something to be mastered. True strength lies not only in the ability to remain silent, but also in the ability to determine when to speak and when not to. Imagine a situation. A person is faced with a choice, either to give up disputes forever or to master the art of influence through conflict. What will make him stronger? Suppose one morning he wakes up and he hears a voice saying that he has only 100 words left to say for the rest of his life. Every word, every phrase acquires enormous value. Will he waste them in the heat of a meaningless argument? Will he try to prove his rightness to someone who does not want to listen? Or will he choose words deliberately, like a warrior sharpening his last blade before the decisive battle? This is where the true power lies. And realize what most people ignore. Words are currency. The more recklessly a person spends them, the less their value becomes. Imagine a heated discussion where the pulse quickens and the mind frantically generates arguments, rebuttals, and decisive arguments. There is an overwhelming desire to prove one's case. However, it is worth pausing and asking yourself, who actually has the real power at this moment? Is it the one who desperately seeks to assert themselves, or the one who knows when to be silent? Silence is not a sign of weakness, but a carefully calculated strategy, a demonstration of self-control, and an ability to make the opponent doubt their position without resorting to lengthy arguments. Next time you feel the urge to argue, it is recommended to take a conscious pause. Instead of reacting impulsively, observe the other person carefully. Notice how they inadvertently expose their vulnerabilities, how their speech reveals hidden fears and insecurities. And only then, like a skilled master, choose the most precise words or perhaps refrain from commenting altogether. After all, true strength lies in the ability to remain silent.